Welcome back, everyone, to Day Camps Day 2. Thank you for joining us for another crafting session. Today we're going to be making these cool little lanterns out of mason jars. So remember in our big session when we learned about Cornelius, how Peter didn't expect Cornelius to be one that God could save, but God said, I came for the Jews and the Gentiles and for the whole earth. And God gave Cornelius his Holy Spirit when Cornelius believed in him. In the same way, we can be from anywhere and any place, but if God calls us, he will give us his Holy Spirit when we believe in him. And that's what these little tea lights are going to represent. To remind us that when we believe in Jesus, no matter where we're from, he will fill us with his Holy Spirit so that we can live a holy life in him. Now, the craft supplies that we're going to need are a mason jar. And you're not going to use the lid, but we are going to use the lid for tomorrow's craft. So you're going to want to set that aside in a place that you'll remember where it is. We're going to need some of this twine or this string to make the handle of the lantern. You'll want some Podge, which it dries clear, so that'll help you put the tissue paper onto the jar. The paintbrushes you use, you want to make sure that you don't mind them being a little bit damaged in the end because the glue does tend to stick them together even after you wash them. So old paintbrushes work really nicely for this. Tissue paper in different colors. I chose yellow and orange and green just because they looked really nice together and look kind of fiery. A hot glue gun with some extra glue sticks. Some scissors, and these little templates that we've provided for you of the Holy Spirit, some fire to represent the Holy Spirit coming on people and filling them with God's Spirit, and stars, reminding us that the light that God gives us, he doesn't intend us to keep to ourselves, but that we are to shine like stars in the universe and hold out the gospel of truth to this very dark world. And our tea light, of course, which we'll put in at the end. So these are our supplies. So let's get started on our craft. So to get this mottled effect on our mason jar, we'll have to tear up the pieces of tissue paper into smaller bits. So let's do that. Now these pieces don't always have to be the same size. They can be different sizes and different shapes. Anything that you want them to be. If you wanted, you could also just cover the entire mason jar in one huge piece of tissue paper, but I like to see it overlap because it gives different ways for the light to shine through. And you can also layer a bunch of different colors on top. I've only stuck to a couple right here, but you can use blues or purples or reds or any other color that you can think of that you might like for your lantern to have. Now I'm going to use the green to go around the rim, and I'm going to use the yellow and the orange to go around the body of this jar. But again, you can do it however you'd like, however you want your lantern to look. All right, so to start with the Mod Podge, if you have a bigger container, you can put that into a smaller little dish, maybe a plastic bowl. Or if you have a small container like this, I like to first shake it up a bit. And then I like to dab it right onto the jar itself. So if you put a bit there, and then you start painting it on. And it won't dry too quickly, so you don't have to worry about it drying as fast as a hot glue gun does. But you probably want to handle about a quarter of the jar at the time, just so you make sure that none of it dries too fast. And then you simply start layering on. And you can overlap layers too. And you can put a bit more Mod Podge on top to help hold them down. And tissue paper does tear, so you want to be quite gentle with it, but also be quite generous in the Mod Podge that you put on. I'm saying yes to you and no to Okay, now that you're done your first rough layer, you'll see that I haven't really filled in all the spots yet. I just wanted to get a basic layer down to see what I'm working with. So you can go back, and if there are weaker areas that you can see through, or if there are places that you haven't covered yet, just fill those up again with tissue paper and just repeat the process. And I'm also probably going to run out of tissue paper, so again, if you need more, you can always go back and rip some more. Just make sure your hands aren't too sticky, or else you will be stuck to all the tissue paper that you try and rip.
I do not need safety as much as I need you. You're dangerous, but Lord, you're beautiful. I'll chase you through the pain. I'll carry my cross, 'cause real love is not afraid to bleed.
So now that I've covered up the entire body of this jar with colors, I'm going to put the green on the rim. If you had chosen to do the same colors for the rim, you could have just faded right into that, but since I chose a different color, I wanted to show you how I did it. So I put the yellow and the orange right up to the bottom of this little rim here, and the green I'll just put around all this empty space up here. And this is a bit of a trickier part just because your hands might get gluey, but that's okay. There's always water to wash it off after.
I've conjured up the cost. Oh, I've conjured up the cost. Yes, I've conjured up the cost, and you are worth it. I've conjured up the cost. Oh, I've conjured up the cost. Yes, I've conjured up the cost, and you are worth it.
All right, so now we've finished putting all of our tissue paper on our jars. All right, now that we've got our mason jar all tissue papered up, now we can use our little shapes here and put them on in whatever ways you like. And we're gonna put them on the exact same way as we did the tissue paper. So we get our Mod Podge again, and you can put a bit on the, ooh, okay, you can put a bit on the jar itself. That was a lot. And as you can see, my paintbrush has dried a bit. So again, make sure you're using paintbrushes you don't mind getting dry like that. And put them on in whichever way you like. And they might need a bit more Mod Podge than the tissue paper because the paper is a bit thicker. It's actually a lot thicker than the tissue paper. There you have the dove. And now I'll speedily go through the other objects. And I've discovered that it is good to put paint beneath the paper, so make sure you do that first. All right, now that we have all the objects on in the way that we want them to be, we are going to make the handle of the jar. So to do this, we're going to take our string and wrap it around the bottom, right beneath this bottom rim. I'll pull this around to the front. So I'm tying a quick knot in there, and you want to make sure it's quite secure. We can make it firmer with the hot glue gun later, but for now we're just going to be, tying some knots. Okay, so once you have your first knot, you will want to pull this string up. You'll want to make sure it's long enough that you can reach to the other side before you tie that. And I'm going to cut this string here so that we have less to work with and less to get in our way. So we'll pull this side over the top to the other side here. To the other side here, and you'll want to put this string underneath the stuff that we tied around the rim of the jar. So you might need a bit of help for this because it can be a bit tricky to get it underneath, but we'll go one by one. Okay, so there's one of them, and see how it's underneath? You want to make sure it's looking like that for both of them. Okay, now that we have it underneath, pull them both up to the height that you want, and we're going to tie another knot with these two around each other. And again, if you need help with the knots, this is a bit of a trickier step, so don't be afraid to ask for help from an older sibling or from a parent, or even from a friend if they're around. Okay, and now you can cut off these little tail ends to as short as you want them to be. I like to have a little bit hanging down because it makes it look a bit more rustic. And if you'd like, at this point you can use the hot glue gun to glue underneath these knots so that it sticks a bit firmer to the jar. That's how I glued these down. So see how these don't move? You just want to dab a bit of glue under there. But if you don't mind it moving around, and if you think that your jar won't fall, you can keep it like this. So once you pull a little paper out of your light, you can turn it on, stick it inside, and there you have your lantern. So here we have our lantern. So remember that as in today's story where we saw God give Cornelius, a person who was outside the Jewish people, the Holy Spirit when he believed in Jesus, God promises us that even though many of us aren't from Israel and we aren't Jews, he has chosen to save us no matter where we're from if we turn to follow Jesus. And that when we turn to follow Jesus, he'll fill us with his Holy Spirit. So we can go into the world and spread his gospel to everybody around us. He's promised us that when he gives us his Holy Spirit, he makes us part of his people, no matter what nation we're from or what family we're from. So when you look at this lantern in a dark room, remember that he calls us to shine like stars in the universe and hold out the word of life, which is the gospel of Jesus that saves us. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another fun craft together as we continue to learn about God's calling in our life and what Jesus calls us to when we follow him.
I've conjured up the